Okay, we're going to teach Jonah. Just to kind of set up where we are with Jonah, you remember for sure that the United Kingdom of Israel, it divided in 931 or 930 after Solomon's death. It divided into the kingdom of Israel to the north and the kingdom of Judah to the south. And that division, that was ordained by God as punishment for Solomon's idolatry. And you see that in 1 Kings chapter 11. And in 2 Kings chapter 14, verses 23 to 25, it says, "In the 15th year of Amaziah, the son of Joash, king of Judah, Jeroboam, the son of Joash, king of Israel, began to reign in Samaria, and he reigned 41 years. And he did what was evil in the sight of the Lord. He did not depart from all the sins of Jeroboam, the son of Nebat, which he had made Israel to sin. He restored the border of Israel from Lebo-Hamath as far as the Sea of Arabah, according to the word of the Lord, the God of Israel, which he spoke by his servant Jonah, the son of Amittai the prophet, who was from Gath-Hepher." Now this is the only mention of Jonah in the Old Testament outside of the book that bears his name. And we learn that Jonah was a prophet from Gath-Hepher, which is a small town. It's a small town in Galilee, just a few miles northeast of Nazareth. And we see that his father was Amittai, and that same thing is noted in Jonah chapter 1, verse 1, but we don't know anything about Amittai. But Jonah's a prophet. He's from Gath-Hepher. He's the son of Amittai. And Jonah lived, we see, and it says here, in the 15th year of Amaziah, son of Joash, king of Judah, Jeroboam, the son of Joash, king of Israel. So Jonah lived in the days of Israel's king Jeroboam II. You know, there was Jeroboam I, right when the kingdom split. Well, this is after that. This is in the days of Jeroboam II. And he reigned, Jeroboam II reigned as king of Israel from 793 BC to 753 BC. Okay, so we're in the first half of the 8th century BC. 793 to 753. That's when Jeroboam II reigns, and we know that Jonah is alive during the reign of Jeroboam II. And at some unidentified time, we see here in 2 Kings that Jonah had prophesied that the northern kingdom, the kingdom of Israel, that it would extend its territory from the entrance of Lebo-Hamath to the north down to the Dead Sea to the south. So Jonah had prophesied that, and this was accomplished during the reign of Jeroboam II. Now, the book of Jonah, it doesn't identify an author, nor does it identify a specific historical setting. The book is about Jonah, not necessarily by Jonah, right? So God could have inspired the composition of the book of Jonah long after Jonah had died. Now, if despite the third-party perspective, where Jonah is referred to in the third person, if despite that third-person perspective and the unflattering portrait of Jonah that's given in the book, if despite that one assumes that Jonah was in fact the author of the book, well, then the book was written in the latter part of his life in the 8th century, right? Because he's there with Jeroboam 793 to 753. If Jonah's the author, then the book's written sometime in the 8th century. If it's written by somebody else, then it could have been written, okay, after Jonah's death. When? Well, it would have to have been written by around 200 BC. That's the latest it could have been written. You say, why is that? Because Ecclesiasticus, which is another writing, it's also known as the book of Sirach. Ecclesiasticus, which is written about 180 BC, it mentions the 12 prophets. Okay, those are what we call the minor prophets, so they were spoken of as a collection, and Jonah is part of the 12 prophets. So in that collection, he's already known. That's about 180, so the latest the book could have been written is 200 BC. Now, the Assyrian situation. The Assyrians under Shalmaneser III. Now, Jeroboam II, 793, 753. I want to go back to the preceding century. Okay, the Assyrians under Shalmaneser III, they were expanding, and Shalmaneser's expansion plans were temporarily checked in 853 BC in the famous Battle of Karkar. And you see it here, where there was opposition, a coalition that included the city-states of Damascus and Hamath and the nation of Israel. They came up and checked his expansion. But about 12 years later, in 841 BC, Shalmaneser III was on the march again. He made another assault on Damascus, or the nation of Aram. He makes an assault there, and he went there and beyond. And in that time, he succeeded in taking tribute from the Israelite king Jehu. And interestingly, just as a footnote, in 1846, so not all that long ago, in 1846, Austin Henry Layard discovered in Calla, which is modern Nimrud, he discovered a four-sided pillar of black limestone. It's 6 feet 6 inches tall, and it's known as the Black Obelisk of Shalmaneser III because it commemorates, through relief sculptures and through inscriptions, military campaigns that Shalmaneser conducted during his reign. And Shalmaneser says in this artifact, in this black obelisk, that in the campaign of 841 BC, he besieged Damascus, which was governed by Hazael, and he received tribute from Jehu. So here we have this Israelite king named in this artifact. Now, panels show the Israelites carrying various items of tribute on that panel on the right. And you see this fellow bowing down. And this person here, he's described here, it's probably Jehu's ambassador. But the inscription says that this person bowing down, the supplicant, it says Jehu, he's described as Jehu the son of Omri. And it says here, I received from him silver, gold, a golden saplu bowl, a golden vase with pointed bottom, golden tumblers, golden buckets, tin, a staff for a king, and a wooden purutu, or puruhutu, I don't know what that is. But that's what he says he received. And this, like I said, this is probably his ambassador, although some think that's actually the king himself. But here we have this artifact where we see this Israelite king is paying tribute here to Shalmaneser. And then, so this is in 841 BC. And then for the next 40 years or so, the Assyrians are preoccupied with campaigns, other campaigns, and with internal strife. And that allowed Damascus, Aram, to ascend, to become more powerful. And then around 802 BC, we're coming down, Jeroboam 793 to 753. Around 802 BC, the Assyrian king Adad-nirari III, he resumes this aggressive policy that Shalmaneser III, after 40 years of things not being focused over there and distractions and things, well, he resumes this aggressive policy of Shalmaneser, and he crushed Damascus. But he didn't seriously strike Israel, but he was unable to follow up on those successes. And then we have 3 succeeding Assyrian kings. Okay? So Jeroboam II, 793 to 753. Now, over in Assyria, we have 3 kings during 782 to 745. Okay, right during this reign of Jeroboam II, a little bit after. But we have there, these were ineffectual rulers. So we have a time when you have crummy rulers of Assyria right there. And then in that span of these ineffectual Assyrian rulers from 782 to 745, in that span, in 765, there was a famine in Assyria. And that famine either recurred in or continued to 759. It's unclear whether it goes 765 and then another famine in 759, or whether it runs from 765 to 759. But you have that going on. You have ineffectual rulers, you have this famine, and then in 763 BC, in Assyria, there was a solar eclipse. And that's taken as an ominous sign. That's taken as a bad sign. And this all contributed to rebellions in various cities throughout the Assyrian Empire, which, along with this ever-present menace of this kingdom to the north, Urartu, this all contributed to a weakened Assyria. In the words of John Bright in his book, History of Israel, John Bright says, by the mid-8th century, okay, so by 750 roughly, you have things, indeed, Assyria seemed threatened with disintegration. So this major ruling power in the middle of the 8th century, Jeroboam, 793 to 753, and right around the middle of the 8th century, near the end of Jeroboam's reign, things are in great turmoil in Assyria. And you can imagine being Assyrian, famine, all of these riots and things, this kingdom to the north, you've got this ominous sign. Now this will be significant when we start to assess how in the world could these people possibly respond to Jonah. Okay? But you can see the tumult and what is going on. It's like society's breaking apart. We've always been in this position ruling, so there was a great deal of uncertainty going on at that time. All right, let's look at the text. It says, now the word of the Lord came to Jonah the son of Amittai, saying, arise, go to Nineveh, that great city, and call out against it, for their evil has come up before me. But Jonah rose to flee to Tarshish from the presence of the Lord. He went down to Joppa and found a ship going to Tarshish. So he paid the fare and went down into it to go with them to Tarshish, away from the presence of the Lord. So here we have the prophet who's being assigned, told to do something, and we see how he reacts. Now Nineveh was an ancient and important city in Assyria. Nineveh is an ancient, important city there. It's about roughly 500 miles northeast of Palestine or Israel. And various kings had built palaces in Nineveh throughout the centuries, and years later, during the reign of Sennacherib, it would become the capital of Assyria and one of the architectural wonders of the world. But it was still an important city even before then, and you had palaces that had been built there. Now, God was prepared to destroy this city because of its wickedness. He was prepared to do that. You see, He's the God of all the earth. He's the God of all the earth, and He holds all nations accountable. Not just the nations of His covenant people. He's God of all the earth. You see that? And you say, well, how can He do that? Well, mankind knows intuitively. We are built to receive this message intuitively from creation itself. It's not a deductive argument. It is that we know from the perceptions of creation itself that we are responsible to a creator. We simply know that by existence. And we also have a basic moral sense. So not only do we know intuitively from the things that God has made, that there is a creator and we are responsible to that creator, we also have a basic moral sense, a sense of right and wrong. We have a basic moral sense from being made in the image and likeness of God. That's what Paul refers to in Romans chapter 2, verses 14 and 15 as the law of the heart. You see, we have a certain element, there's a certain sense that we have as human beings of right and wrong. That doesn't mean all the things are known, but we have a basic moral sense, and we also know from creation that we are responsible. So you say, well, how is He the God and holding all the nations accountable? How is it fair for Him to do that? Because all mankind, all human beings know intuitively that they are accountable to the Creator, and they all have a basic moral sense and have rejected that. So God here holds all nations accountable. Now, the Living Bible says in verse 2 of Jonah, it says, "Go to the great city of Nineveh and give them this announcement from the Lord. I'm going to destroy you, for your wickedness rises before me. It smells to highest heaven." So this is something, see, about Nineveh, as Frank Page says in his commentary, he says, while all sin is abhorrent to God, in some instances, a specific group of people had become so wicked that God issued a specialized call of localized judgment. So it was with Nineveh. You see, it's essentially, I've had it with you. You see, I've had it with you. So yes, all sin is wrong, all that, but here, the Ninevites, the people here, had become so wicked that God issues this specialized call of localized judgment. But rather than simply destroy Nineveh, instead of just coming in and smoking them as He could have done, God commands Jonah to go there and announce its condemnation. I want you to go to this city, and I want you to announce there and call out against it. So He wants Jonah to go there and announce the condemnation, and Jonah just flatly disobeys. Right? He just flatly disobeys. He boards a ship at Joppa that's heading to Tarshish, which is typically identified with Tartessos in southwest Spain. All right, so if that's the right identification, he's intent on going 2,000 miles in the opposite direction. He says, "Go to Nineveh and proclaim my judgment," 500 miles to the northeast. He runs to Joppa, gets on a vessel going to Tarshish, 2,000 miles the other way. Basically, no way. I'm fleeing in the opposite direction, and no reason is given at this point. No reasons given at this point for the disobedience. Jonah in the story simply stamped as a rebel. He's stamped as a deserter. God has said, go do this, and he says, I'm not doing it. Now, that's kind of shocking. But that's how he's stamped there. No reasons given there, but we'll see, and as you know from reading it, we'll see in chapter 4, verse 2, that what motivated him was that he couldn't stand the thought of being the source of a divine warning to the despised Assyrians, which warning he feared would be their opportunity to receive divine mercy. Because you see, the Assyrians, they're so bad, the Ninevites, that God's ready to smoke them right now. And so Israel has a long history with the Assyrians, with their brutality and how they are. And God tells him to go announce it, and he's going, Now, we're not told that yet, what's motivating it. All we see, he says, go do this, and Jonah says, not doing it. In fact, I'm heading in the other direction. Now, the disobedient, he's trying to flee from the presence of God. Isn't that an odd statement? He's trying to flee from the presence of God, as Jonah would know. This, in one sense, is impossible, right? I mean, Jonah would be aware that God is omnipresent. There is nowhere you can go that you can be away from the Lord. But Jonah's he's seeking to flee from the land of Israel. He's probably seeking to flee from the land of Israel as the place where he had specially experienced God's presence in the revelation of His Word to him. So it's in Israel there that he had experienced this presence of God in the sense of He was using him as a prophet. Now perhaps Jonah hoped that God wouldn't reveal Himself so personally outside of Israel or in such a faraway place. Maybe he hoped that. Or he may have thought or hoped that his fleeing, well, maybe that will then cause God to seek a more willing prophet to go and deliver this message to Nineveh. Maybe that's what he thought. But you see, the disobedient, I think there's something here about the disobedient tend to shun intimacy with God. You see, when you're not living for God or when you're wanting to disobey God, you don't want to be close with God. You don't want to have it. You don't want to face God in your rebellion. And so rather than longing for nearness, you see people, Christians, rather than longing for nearness, longing for intimacy, they flee from it. Now, when a Christian, for example, starts not coming to church, people say, there's nothing at church, it's not the be all and end all. You live your life. I understand that. But I'm telling you, as somebody who's been paying attention, and I'm sure the elders could tell you, when you have somebody who stops coming to church or starts missing all the time, could it be something? Yeah, it could be something going on. They've just a string of difficulties that kept them away. But oftentimes it's a sign of something. You see, oftentimes it's a sign of something. That's something that they are drifting, or when they start avoiding Christians, or when they quit praying, or when they quit studying the Bible. This is oftentimes indicative of a drift of heart, where because people are engaging in things or wanting to engage in things, they are disengaging with God. They do not want to live that way in intimacy with God because they can't. So you see that. But anyway, I just see this in Jonah. He's disobeying and he wants to get away from the presence of God, which I take for him as somehow a sense of intimacy and closeness with God that I think he relates or ties to the land of Israel. And at this time, Joppa's a port city. It's northwest of Jerusalem. At this time, it was probably under the control of the king of Ashkelon, which is a Philistine city. And the crew of the vessel that he boards, obviously they're not Hebrew. And we'll see that in a few verses. But he says, we read in verses 4 to 6, "But the Lord hurled a great wind upon the sea, and there was a mighty tempest on the sea, so that the ship threatened to break up." Now, I don't know about you, but I don't want to be out here on any vessel out here, any kind of deep water, and I'm in a storm that's so violent, the ship's about to break up. Reminds me when John was flying back from China with Frank, in fact, I think. He's flying back in the plane. They hit such turbulence, he thought the plane was going to break apart. Don't want to be there. But here's this storm, he says, it's going to break up. Then the mariners, the old salts, they were afraid. And each cried out to his God, and they hurled their cargo. They hurled the cargo that was in the ship into the sea to lighten it for them. But Jonah had gone down into the inner part of the ship and had lain down and was fast asleep. So the captain came and said to him, "What do you mean, you sleeper? Arise, call out to your God. Perhaps the God will give a thought to us that we may not perish." So we're in a serious storm. This is a frightening storm, and you know the power of nature. If you've ever been in a serious storm, even just a thunderstorm,
That'd be a hurricane, tornado. Well, you've been in a serious thunderstorm. You know the power of, quote, nature. Right? So these guys are in a storm that's just really, really frightening. And the wrath of God, it is unleashed against the defiance of his prophet. You see, here is this creature. This creature will not thumb his nose at God Almighty and do that with impunity. God tells this creature, go to Nineveh and preach. And he says, no, I'm not going to do it. Look, what do you think's going to happen? I think I'll just run away from his presence. He's not going to do that. He's not going to be allowed to treat God that way, no matter where he tries to go. So God causes such a mighty storm that the vessel is on the verge of breaking apart. You see, this is the awesomeness of God's wrath, just exhibited in the power he brings on this situation. And as I say, these sailors, these old people, these old salts, guys who knew all about the sea and all of this, who'd seen all kinds of things, they're scared stiff. They're throwing the cargo overboard. You know, people would pay to have their cargo shipped. And so that's part of what you're doing. You're shipping the cargo. So you better have a good reason to be throwing it in the water, because there's going to be some splaining to do when you get where you're going, and the people who paid to transport the stuff, and you're saying, I don't have it. So you know how critical it is when I start throwing the stuff overboard. But they do that, you see. They were throwing it overboard. That was a move that was designed to improve the stability and the maneuverability of the vessel. And you see the same thing done in Acts chapter 27, verse 18. And so they're doing that. They're frightened, throwing everything over, and they're all yelling to their gods. You know, hoping that he or she or they somehow would intervene to help them. So we're talking about crisis city is what this is. This is a frightening situation. As the Old Testament scholars John Walton and Victor Matthews and Mark Chavalis, they say in their book, the InterVarsity Press Bible Background Commentary, they say patron deities were rarely cosmic deities. So the sailors would not have thought that their personal or family gods had sent the storm. In the polytheistic context of the ancient world, one could generally identify divine activity with confidence, and so there's something particularly about the storm. We hop on going, all of a sudden, they're going, uh-oh. He says you could generally identify divine activity with confidence, but it was another matter altogether to discover which God was acting and why. Because it's polytheistic, we got all kinds of gods in this world. Well, who's behind this? He said the sailors call out to their gods in the hope that one of their patron deities might be able to exert some influence on whichever god has become disturbed enough to send the storm. The more contacts made, the better. So the captain wakes Jonah so that he could also call upon his patron deity. It was all hands on deck. Everybody had to be calling out to their patron local gods to find out and put pressure on whoever this god is who's doing this. Because we don't know who's doing it. But what we do know is you better be calling on your God. Because we're all in this together. Nobody gets a timeout. Nobody gets to go sleep. We're all saying, hey! Help! Help, because we are in trouble. And so that's what's here when he goes down and he says, what are you doing just here? Now God's judgment on sin is sure. Right? If we're in rebellion to God, our storm's coming. You know, we can have false hopes. The world is filled with people with false hopes like Jonah, thinking, listen, I'm going to just blow God off. I'm going to laugh about it or whatever. I don't think Jonah's laughing, but I'm going to just blow God off and nothing's going to happen. And I'm telling you, as sure as I'm standing here, your storm is coming. Whether it's here, now, next week, this life, your storm is coming. You will not treat God that way. And so Jonah's thinking, okay, I'm just going to run away. No, you're not. No, you're not. His storm is coming right there. We're not going to avoid judgment for rebellion. Okay, take that to the bank. We're not going to avoid judgment for rebellion. Now, in contrast to everybody else on board, Jonah's not interested in calling out on his God. He's sleeping during the crisis. And I say, even the pagan captain rebukes the prophet for failing to seek his God's intervention. But Jonah's running from God. He doesn't want to have anything to do with God. He knows he's disobeying God. Can you see him sitting here and actually calling out to God? He's not doing that at all. And what an indictment of his spiritual condition. And we get to 1:7-10. And they said to one another, "Come, let us cast lots, that we may know on whose account this evil, this bad thing, this storm, has come upon us." So they cast lots, and the lot fell on Jonah. Then they said to him, "Tell us on whose account this evil has come upon us. What's your occupation? Where do you come from? What's your country? And of what people are you?" And he said to them, "I am a Hebrew, and I fear the Lord, the God of heaven, who made the sea and the dry land." Then the men were exceedingly afraid and said to him, "What is this you've done?" For the men knew that he was fleeing from the presence of the Lord, because he had told them. Now Jonah is revealed by Lot to be responsible for the calamity they're experiencing. And the lots are probably dice with the sides, they're alternately light and dark. Okay, this is probably how this worked. So when you're throwing the dice, 2 darks is a no. 2 lights is a yes. And a light and a dark probably is throw again. Okay? And the God chose, he's at work here, and he chose to cause the lots to work according to plan as the sailors that they're throwing, and they eliminate all the others on the ship. No, Jonah, that's the dude. Okay? So they identify Jonah as the source here. And after Jonah's revealed to be responsible, for the calamity, they bombard him with questions about the details. They want to know what in the world is going on, right? And when they learn that the God from whom Jonah is fleeing is the Lord, they're even more afraid. I mean, they're already flipped out. But now when they learn this, they're even more afraid. And they're incredulous that Jonah has disobeyed him. Because Jonah tells me he made sea and dry land. I am a servant of the God. They're going, are you out of your mind? What are you doing? What have you done? And they're thinking also, and why did you come on my ship? You want to run from this God and you're going to come on my ship? What in the world is wrong with you? So they're incredulous about that. Here's another pagan rebuke. And so then we see here in 11-16. Then they said to him, "What shall we do to you that the sea may quiet down for us?" For the sea grew more and more tempestuous. Okay? I'm talking just a huge, frightening storm. He said to them, "Pick me up and hurl me into the sea. Then the sea will quiet down for you. For I know it is because of me that this great tempest has come upon you." Nevertheless, the men rowed hard to get back to dry land, but they could not, for the sea grew more and more tempestuous against them. Therefore they called out to the Lord, Yahweh, Jonah's God. They called out, O Lord, let us not perish for this man's life, and lay not on us innocent blood, for you, O Lord, have done as it pleased you. So they picked up Jonah and hurled him into the sea, and the sea ceased from its raging. Then the men feared the Lord exceedingly, and they offered a sacrifice to the Lord and made vows. So here we have, in this section, they asked Jonah what to do to calm the sea. And he tells them to throw him overboard. Right? Throw him overboard. That's what they want to do. And in doing this, Jonah acknowledges God's just claim on his life for sin. Okay, he acknowledges this, that God has this just claim on his life, submitting to God's death sentence. What should we do? What can we do? And Jonah says, okay, throw me into the water. Throw me overboard. I'm the cause. I know what is owed. I know what has happened. And I am due death. So throw me overboard. In essence, he tells them, hand me over to God. Hand me over to God. And we cannot appreciate grace until we appreciate the justice, the rightness of our condemnation. If I never accept in my heart, in my spirit, that I deserve death, I deserve it. If I never accept that, I will not see the commutation of my sentence as mercy. I'll see it simply as delayed justice. Right? If I don't really feel like it's right, what I've done rightfully is due death, well then when I'm spared death, I don't see it as mercy. I say, well, that's what should have happened all along because I didn't deserve death. I didn't deserve it. And see, that's part of what happens, I think, in the message that we preach. We have to have people understand the holiness of God. You have to understand the gravity of the offense of saying to God, I'm not going to do what you want. And until I feel that, until I see that, well, I do deserve judgment. I deserve condemnation. That would be the right, the true, the correct thing to give me. Well, then I'm not just relieved and blessed, and I don't see the commutation. I don't see my being relieved of that consequence as something that is great mercy. I don't see that. You see, Ezekiel 18, verse 4 and verse 20 says, the soul that sins will die. Paul in Romans 6:23, for the wages of sin is death. And Jonah felt this so concretely that he offered to be tossed overboard. Jonah has come to the realization, he recognizes this is what I deserve. This is something that's right. And now the sailors, they understandably, they fear playing a role in killing Jonah. You know, people sometimes say, well, they should have listened to Jonah. But I understand. They're not just going to flippantly throw Jonah into the water and wind up killing Jonah. They fear that role. They fear it might expose them to the vengeance of Jonah's God. Right? Jonah says, do this. They throw him there thinking, well, what if our doing that, what if our killing the one who's been given assignment by the creator of everything, I throw him overboard, and what if that makes him angry? Okay, so when he says, throw me overboard, I submit to God's judgment on my life, these guys are saying, is there another way? I'm rowing, baby. But when you're rowing against God, God just says, you're going nowhere. All right, you're going nowhere. And so that's what winds up happening. They're seeking that, but they see no other solution. And when they don't see another solution, they pray that God will not hold them accountable for Jonah's death. Right? They're saying, listen, we don't want to do this, but don't hold us accountable. Essentially, you're the one behind all this. We're trying to avoid it. So please, don't hold us accountable for his death. And that's what they're doing. So they don't see any other situation. And this is another indication of their spiritual awareness. And they throw Jonah overboard. And I just picture this, right? Doesn't speak about how immediately, but in my mind, I see this just insane storm that is just so, black, wind, waves, everything's just freaking out. What should I do? Everybody's calling out to their gods. All this, we're throwing all the stuff overboard. It's just all hands on deck. Throw him overboard. Just calm. Right? Like, whoa. And I just picture that going on. So as a result, they fear God even more. You see, they fear him even more, probably meaning they added God, Yahweh, to their pantheon. They're polytheists, right? They got a shelf full of gods. They got all kinds of gods. When they fear him more, it probably means they're going, he's coming on board. You see, they add him to their pantheon and they make vows. They offer sacrifice. Now, these last things, it's possible they understood as taking place later when they're back on land. Maybe that's what's understood there. Maybe not. But they wind up doing that. They're making these sacrifices or will, either then or will. And they see this God when this happens. And then the story, you could think, well, that's where the story should end, right? I mean, Jonah has thumbed his nose at God. Jonah has disobeyed. Jonah's life has now been given up in punishment for the sin. And through that, the Gentiles have been spared. So the story could end right there, but the story doesn't end there, and Lord willing, we'll pick up next.